the Austrians and the Chicago schools see economic prosperity and growth comes from individual initiative, individual entrepreneurship, kind of private sources. The private market is what drives economic growth, not the public sector. And so for Friedman, then the question is, what is the government's role? And because he's lived through the Great Depression, he's not laissez-faire, and he won't ever be laissez-faire. Now, interestingly, Hayek, living through the Great Depression, at first is laissez-faire. And he's like, sure, like, let it rip. And things get so bad that Hayek's like, okay, that's not going to work.
Can we actually define laissez-faire? So what do we mean? Like, what's the free market? What's laissez-faire? What's the extreme version here?
So yeah, laissez-faire means leave it be in France. It's more often used as an insult than as an actual. Very few people are completely and totally laissez-faire. That would be like the pure laissez-faire would be the sort of maybe pure anarchist position, like the state does nothing, or the state isn't even there. But it tends to, if I could maybe make it more precise, it would be focused on freedom of contract would be essential. And that means like the buyer of labor and the seller of labor must have absolute freedom to contract. So that means no minimum wage law, no working hours law, no employment law, things like that. That was, and this is all pre-progressive movement. A lot of things are that way, right? You know, imagine you're in 19th century America and you have a farm and you hire someone to help you on the farm. You offer the money, they take it. If they fall off a ladder and break their back, maybe you help them out, maybe you don't, right? But there's not a whole apparatus of legal liability and safety and things like that. So that would be one piece. Another piece of laissez-faire would be free trade amongst nations. So no regulation of who can invest in a nation or who can take money out of a nation. So Nippon Steel could come and invest in U.S. Steel, and there would be no grounds in which to reject that. Or you could, as a billionaire in the United States, relocate you and all your money to another country, and the United States couldn't try to keep you, and nobody else could stop you from coming in. And then in the context of economic crisis, laissez-faire would not encompass centrally provided relief, because in the pure theory, again, very seldom applied purely, but in the pure theory, the wages need to come down far enough and people need to be desperate enough to start taking work and to start the machine again. So the theory would be if you give people relief, they might not go back to work. Now, almost nobody says that in the Great Depression because the situation is so bad and it's people are starving on the street and people feel for humanitarian and ethical reasons, it's not okay to say that. The Austrians, though, at first, Hayek and Lionel Robbins are like, this is a business cycle and it needs to run its course and it will be detrimental if we intervene. And then pretty soon, Hayek has to change his tune.
So the Austrians are the most hardcore in terms of laissez-faire.
Absolutely. And so Hayek will make the turn towards accepting more of a state, and then we'll come to talk about how the state needs to support what he calls a competitive order. But his mentor, Ludwig von Mises, still remains very hardcore and is not really open to things like unemployment insurance or other state-based interventions.
What does von Mises say about like human suffering that's witnessed in the Great Depression, for example? Like, what are we supposed to, as economists, as humans that define policy, what are we supposed to see when people are like suffering at scale?
Yeah, I wish I knew an answer to that question. I don't know enough about von Mises and his reaction in the Great Depression. I think I would hazard that he would look more to down the road and say, well, if you start here, you're going to go places that are bad. But I don't factually know what he said in response. I do know that Hayek's position doesn't last very long. It's not a position you can hold to. Maybe you could hold to it in other cycles. The other thing that was interesting is I found very few Americans saying this. Most who were kind of small town electeds, or the most famous is Andrew Mellon, quoted by Herbert Hoover. So not directly we don't have him on record saying this, but apparently Hoover records in his memoirs that Mellon said something like, liquidate real estate, liquidate stocks, purge the rottenness out of the system. People will live a healthier life. And certainly there were members of the Federal Reserve who felt like it would create, they didn't say moral hazard, but it would create what we now call moral hazard, bad habits, were we to intervene and to save failing banks, because failing banks need to be taught a lesson. They need to be taught discipline. And so a lot of people, I think, saw it in the context of discipline. This is discipline. And if you remove the discipline, you'll be taking away something fundamental in society.
So Milton Friedman never quite went all the way to laissez-faire.
No, he didn't see that. And what's really interesting is the number of incredibly radical proposals that he and his teachers were floating. So I've mentioned Frank Knight. Another really important influence on Friedman was Henry Simons, who was a junior professor at Chicago. And Simons had this idea for what he called 100% money, which would be a law that says banks have to hold 100% of the deposits they receive. They can't loan them out on the margin. So this would completely and totally have overhauled the U.S. banking system. And he would have said, there's a category of things called banks where you get deposits, and then there's going to be a category of sort of, he didn't say investment banks, but investment vehicles that will invest. So similar to what did happen in some ways in the banking reforms, in that in the 1930s, the investment banks were split from the deposit banks, and the banks that took deposits were much more highly regulated, and they were supported by the FDIC. But the point being, the Chicago school had these very radical proposals for reform. Go off the gold standard, restrict the currency, change the banks, immediately relief payments now. What is important to note, though, is that they thought of all of those as emergency measures to get through the emergency, not as permanent alterations in the state of what had to be, and not permanent alterations between state and market. Where the Keynesian assumption is things have changed, times have changed, we're in a new dispensation, and we need a new relationship. So Milton Friedman is very open to doing things differently in a state of emergency. He will have different ideas during World War II than any other time. And that's why I think he would have been supportive of at least the first rounds of coronavirus relief, because I think he would have put his emergency thinking hat on. So in that way, he was definitely more flexible.